Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current version of my Sunday sermon. We can take it off of this mode here. Here we go. How are the 1960s different from today? I've been listening to The Rest is History, one of my favorite podcasts, and they've done a series on 1968. And 1968 was an extremely turbulent year in American history. One of the interesting things, though, when you look at the 60s, a lot of people think back on the 60s and think flower children and things like that. But actually, the 60s were a fairly conservative time. And the world of media and the world of news was a very different place than it was today. There was a very, very big emphasis on keeping up appearances. And if you looked at John F. Kennedy, who was elected in 1960, and you look at the mystique of Camelot, they had very much sort of an image of a young, good-looking, vibrant president, and then his vice president, LBJ, was the master of the Senate. And, well, if you actually look at what we know about these men's lives, things weren't anywhere near so rosy. John F. Kennedy had a series of marital affairs. He probably would have been considered a sexual predator according to the standards of today. He was dependent upon amphetamines, opioids, and steroids for his various conditions. In fact, his health was terribly poor, and he only had that youthful appearance and youthful vigor because he had doctors basically keeping him drugged up to do these things. LBJ was a consummate politician, a very successful man, but also terribly insecure and very rough. He would regularly expose himself to make a point to friends and foes. He would conduct business on the toilet with an open door and have people come into the room while he was, I guess, doing his business squared. He was also known for giving the Johnson treatment, where he would he was about 6'3". He would get around somebody smaller and he'd put his hands on him and pressure him while he was telling him what he wanted to do. He also was a president who decided to not run for re-election because of the Vietnam War. Both men had tremendous capacities. Obviously, JFK was a brilliant orator. LBJ had a real heart for civil rights. He really wanted to do what was right for the poor and for African Americans. And yet, all of these men are just these mixed bags. And today, when we look at the current media situation, well, it's hard to imagine a president pulling off an affair in the White House and getting away with it. Bill Clinton was the last one who seemed to have tried. For what we know about, there's so much scrutiny on anyone who would be in office today. But when you find these revelations of the past, it tends to breed cynicism, and we tend to say things like, "Oh, all politicians are this way," when in fact, not all politicians are this way. But it's difficult for us to sort of get our minds around to figure out what to believe and what to trust. We've been following Israel through the Old Testament. And Andrew Klavan had that great line, "Biblical Israel is the theater in which God plays out his relationship with humankind." The book of Deuteronomy, we just finished reading it in our men's group. These people will embody my will to the world. That was Israel's mission. But then these people will also rebel, God said in the book of Deuteronomy, in many times. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. With David and Solomon, it seems like God's kingdom had come in some ways. They were popular. The people of the earth would come to see Solomon's wisdom and his kingdom and his wealth. But after Solomon, it breaks up into two separate kingdoms, and there's a long, slow decline, which seemed to be exactly what Deuteronomy was talking about. Last week we looked at Isaiah, and his world went from Israel and Judah sort of being nations among all these other nations to the Assyrian Empire on the march. Israel and Judah were now inferiors in a world of far larger empires, and that made them wonder, well, where is God? And I thought we were supposed to be his mission, yet the prophets would come along and say, Well, you weren't keeping up. You weren't keeping up the covenant, were you? Do you remember the book of Deuteronomy? Israel, of course, in the world of realpolitik, tried to work its way towards self-preservation. She allied herself with the kingdom just north of her, Assyria, trying to hold back the Assyrians, but it was all for naught. And the Assyrians would swoop in. They would conquer the northern kingdom. They would take off many of its people and redistribute its people throughout their empire, taking people from other places and bringing them down into where the northern kingdom of Israel had been. It was a terribly traumatic and painful thing. Yet, even after Assyria swallows the northern kingdom, Judah sort of survives by the skin of its teeth. And she sort of maintains herself. Hezekiah, of course, had this episode when Assyria was right at the gates of Jerusalem, and God saves her at the last minute. Judah is delivered from Assyria under Hezekiah, who cozies up with the Assyrian rival Babylon. Because, of course, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And he shows the Babylonians his wealth, and he brags about that, which would become a bad thing when the Babylonians come knocking at the door. Under Manasseh, Hezekiah's son, Judah becomes a vassal of Assyria because Assyria is still large and powerful. The high places that Hezekiah sought to close are reopened, and these are places where Israel is basically freelancing as its religion. Sometimes it's sacrificing to the Lord. Sometimes it's probably mixing in practices of other nations. And when a nation is strong, everybody in the world thinks, well, their gods must be strong. And maybe we should follow their gods because their gods seem to be bringing peace and prosperity to their land. And so all sorts of things are going on then in Judah. Pagan rites and practices are flourishing. Even some intimations that fertility religion and shrine prostitution is being carried on in the temple itself. Judah is becoming like the other nations around here, sort of another copy of the northern nation. And of course, we saw how that northern nation disintegrated and became part of the background noise that was this part of the world. Well, Assyria starts to wobble, and Egypt and Babylon begin to ascend. And while there's sort of, again, no big boss in the region, that leaves Judah some breathing room. And Josiah comes on the throne very young, and he's backed by a group of people that want to cast out the Assyrian gods and cast out the Assyrian religion and revive the religion of Israel. And so they clean out the temple and they renovate the temple. In the temple, they find this book of the law, and they realize just how far they've fallen short. And so they try to apply the book of the law. And now that Assyria is sort of left up north, they can sort of reoccupy a bunch of that land and territory that once was Israel back in the days of that was all of a united Israel back in the days of Solomon. And for a while, it seems that things are going very, very well under Josiah. But Egypt, again, is growing, and Babylon is growing, and Judah is trying to figure out sort of how to play this. So Egypt decides it wants to go north, and they actually ally with their old enemy, Assyria, because Babylon seems to be rising. And Josiah isn't great with this, so he takes his army out to the plains of Megiddo and faces Egypt and loses the battle and loses his life. And what that means is now Egypt is occupying and making Judah its vassal. And Egypt then installs one of Josiah's sons, Jehoiakim, as his vassal, as Egypt's man in Jerusalem. Between the death of Hezekiah and the final fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians, there lay precisely a century. Seldom has a nation experienced so many dramatic reversals of fortune in so relatively short a time. Through the first half of the period, a vassal of Assyria, Judah then knew a rapid succession of periods of independence and of subjection, first to Egypt, then to Babylon, before finally destroying herself in a futile rebellion against the latter. So quickly did these phases follow one another that it was possible for one man, as Jeremiah did, to have witnessed them all. Jeremiah lived through the complete undoing of his world. The words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah. And through the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, down to the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, when the people of Israel went into exile. Jeremiah was there to see it all in one lifetime. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. Elements of Moses. Moses wasn't too young, but I can't speak. In his case, I'm too young. No one will believe me. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you, and I will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth. You can sort of have echoes of Isaiah, what we read last week. And said to me, I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. The word of the Lord came to me again. What do you see? I see a pot that is boiling, I answered. It is tilting towards us from the north. The Lord said to me, From the north disaster will be pouring out on all those who live in the land. I am about to summon all the peoples of the northern kingdoms, declares the Lord. Their kings will come and set upon their thrones in the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem. They will come against all her surrounding walls and against all the towns of Judah. I will pronounce my judgments on my people because of their wickedness in forsaking me, in burning incense to other gods, and in worshiping what their hands have made. This was very vivid for the people because, of course, it wasn't that long before that the northern kingdom was destroyed. It wasn't that long ago that this is early on, but they know the threat coming from the north, and for a while there's a little bit of breathing room. But the answer is Jerusalem was spared from the Assyrians, but they will not be spared for long. Jeremiah, your world will end. Get yourself ready. Stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I will terrify you before them. Today I have made you a fortified city, an iron pillar, a bronze wall to stand against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, its officials, its priests, and the people of the land. They will fight against you, but not overcome you. For I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Jeremiah at this point probably had no idea he would need this, but he would. Jump way ahead in his life. Josiah has been killed. Jehoiakim, now a vassal of Egypt, is on the throne and trying to keep things under control and keep everyone sort of pro-Egypt right now. But Jeremiah, this fortified city, this iron post, won't be bent. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Take a scroll and write on it all the words I have spoken to you concerning Israel, Judah, and all the other nations from that time I began speaking to you in the reign of Josiah until now. Perhaps when the people of Judah hear about every disaster I plan to inflict on them, they will each turn from their wicked ways. Then I will forgive their wickedness and their sin. Compare that with what God says to Isaiah, where they won't listen, they won't hear. Jeremiah is given a little bit more optimistic point of view, but we'll see. Don't get too optimistic. So Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Neriah. And while Jeremiah dictated all the words the Lord had spoken to him, Baruch wrote them on a scroll. Then Jeremiah told Baruch, I am restricted. I'm not allowed to go to the Lord's temple. People already know who Jeremiah is. And while everyone is like, well, let's, be okay with Egypt and maybe we'll get out of all this stuff and maybe God will protect us because, the Assyrians have come and we watched them go and the Egyptians are here, but, they're taking our money now, but, maybe we'll get out of this. And Jeremiah keeps saying, no, it's not going to end well. So Baruch, you go to the house of the Lord on a day of fasting and read to the people from the scroll the words of the Lord that I wrote as I dedicated. Why are the people fasting? Read them to all the people of Judah who come in from their towns. Why are they sort of rushing to the capital? Perhaps they will bring their petition before the Lord and will each turn from their wicked ways, for the anger and wrath promised against this people by the Lord are great. Now, days of fasting weren't programmed into the calendar. The wolf was at the door. Old Philistia had rebelled against Babylon, and Babylon was there, and Egypt was tottering. And so Israel was fasting because they were still Team Egypt, and it looked like it was all going to end. We're not told what the present emergency was, but it may well have been the arrival of the Babylonian armies on the Philistine plains. The reading was done in December 604 BC. When Micaiah, son of Gemariah, the son of Shaphan, heard all the words of the Lord from the scroll, he went down to the secretary's room in the royal palace, where all the officials were sitting. He was down there. He's like, you guys got to come up here. This guy's up there reading a scroll, and it's going to cause problems. People are going to panic. It's basically saying that the Lord isn't going to protect us, that the armies of Babylon are going to come here, and then it's all going to fall apart. All the officials sent Jehudi, son of Nethaniah, the son of Shelemiah, the son of Cushi, say to Baruch, bring the scroll from which you have read to the people and come. So Baruch, son of Neriah, went to them with the scroll in his hand. And they said to him, sit down, please, and read it to us. So Baruch read it to them. When they all heard these words, they looked at each other in fear and said to Baruch, we must report all these words to the king. Then they asked Baruch, tell us, how did you come to write this? You're a scribe. Scribes work for others. Did Jeremiah dictate it? He's already got the reputation. It sounds like the kinds of things Jeremiah has been saying. Is this his stuff? Yes, Baruch replied. He dictated all these words to me, and I wrote them in ink on the scroll. Then the official said to Baruch, you and Jeremiah go and hide. Don't let anybody know you are here. They were doing him a favor. After they put the scroll in the room of Elishama, the secretary, they went to the king in the courtyard and reported everything to him. The king sent Jehudi to get the scroll, and Jehudi brought it to the room of Elishama, the secretary, and read it to the king and all the officials standing beside him. Lucky Baruch got out of there. It was the 9th month, and the king was sitting in the winter apartment with fire burning in the fire pot in front of him. Whenever Jehudi had read 3 or 4 columns of the scroll, the king cut them off with a scribe's knife and threw them into the fire pot until the scroll was burned in fire. The king and all of his attendants who heard all these words showed no fear and did not tear their clothes. Why would he say that? Because the point of the prophecy was that they would listen, and tearing one's clothes was a way of expressing contrition, and being afraid was an expression of truthful reality. I didn't show any of it. They doubled down. Even though Elnathan, Delaiah, and Gemariah urged the king not to burn the scroll, he would not listen to them. Instead, the king commanded Jerahmeel, the son of the king, and a bunch of these other guys to arrest Baruch the scribe and Jeremiah the prophet. But the Lord had hidden them. After the king burned the scroll containing the words that Baruch had written at Jeremiah's dictation, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Take another scroll and write in not all the words that were on the first scroll, which Jehoiakim, king of Judah, burned up. Also tell Jehoiakim, king of Judah, this is what the Lord says. I send you a message. I tell you what's coming. I'm doing you a favor. You're not listening. You burned that scroll and said, why did you write on it that the king of Babylon would certainly come and destroy this land and wipe it from both man and beast? Why would you do this, Jeremiah? Therefore, this is what the Lord says about Jehoiakim, king of Judah. He will have no one to sit on the throne of David. His body will be thrown out and exposed to heat by day and frost by night. I will punish him and his children and his attendants for their wickedness. I will bring on to them and those living in Jerusalem and the people of Judah every disaster I pronounced against them because they have not listened. Again, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, there's lots of, you can read the curses right in there, and God's basically saying, that's it. I'm done. Babylon's going to wipe you out. We're at that point in our relationship. So Jeremiah took another scroll and gave it to the scribe Baruch, son of Neriah. And as Jeremiah dictated, Baruch wrote on it all the words of the scroll that Jehoiakim, king of Judah, had burned in the fire, and many similar words were added to them. And presumably a lot of that is what makes up the book of Jeremiah today. Now the world has changed. The world is kind of wild. Somebody posted this picture, it's from a few years ago, where the wife of the guy who's in charge of world wrestling has been named the nominee for the Secretary of Education. And this person on Twitter, who's a wrestling fan, writes, U.S. politics is so wild. Here's the mayor of Knox County tombstoning the U.S. Secretary of Education. It is wild. It's crazy. It's hard to know what to believe about the Kennedys, about LBJ, about anything we read. What do we know? Who to believe? Jehoiakim, vassal of Egypt, burns Jeremiah's scroll because it says things that he doesn't like while the Babylonian army is drawing near. In the end, Jeremiah will outlast Jehoiakim in his office. But those who want to still go back to Egypt will force Jeremiah to go with him, and presumably he will die in Egypt. God is hard on his prophets. We live in a strange world. You can go onto Netflix and watch Mike Tyson fight Jake Paul, and it's a very strange thing. This guy is nearly 60 and fighting this younger guy who sort of is a boxer but started out on YouTube. The world is so crazy. It's sort of hard to figure out. And, we sort of expected maybe the young guy would just flatten the old guy, but they just sort of threw some punches at each other and all took their payday. We're awash in images and signals, struggling to know what is beyond our personal relational reach. We cynically imagine, not without cause, that everything boils down to a payday. Is politics merely Moloch, or markets merely mammon? If it's written on paper, well, you can burn that. If it's on a screen, it's gone in a second. What are we to believe? The kings of Israel cannot be trusted. The priests stood by while the idols of rival empires were placed in the temple. The prophets of Israel were unreliable. Some were just false, and we read all about them, about false prophets. Poor Jeremiah and Baruch have to hide. And most people probably had trouble telling the difference. And then a strange man comes. And he does miracles, and the people are amazed. And he teaches as one with authority. And he says things that alienate and confuse as much as inspire. The meek will inherit the earth. It says the strangest things. Now, the rival forces of his day, they can't agree on anything, but they agree on one thing. Everybody hates him. He should die. He's in the way. They're having their fight just fine without him getting in the middle and having people, I don't know, think about release of captives and sight to the blind and the coming of the Lord once more. And so they kill him. And those rival forces war until the temple is destroyed and the Roman armies win. And the people of Jerusalem are once again exiled from their city. But centuries after, the followers of this strange man claimed he rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, more and more Romans begin to believe him, and they begin to worship him. And they declare strange things like Jesus is Lord in a day where everyone would say Caesar is Lord. And no, there's fights between them. They try to figure out exactly what it all means, but eventually he conquers Rome. Rome begins to worship him. Now, even under regimes unimaginable by today's standards, Jesus' followers loved one another. They sought to bear witness to him, and they continued to believe he is Lord of heaven, earth, and history. And even us in the church today claim the same thing. It's a remarkable dynasty. And it goes on today, but it endures through all of these incredible changes in the world. You will be my witnesses. Jeremiah did it with his scroll writing. We do it in ways that are fit for our times. We do live in interesting times. We don't know what is coming down the road. We keep doing what Jesus tells us to do until the day he wraps things up, either for us individually or together. And what Paul gives us, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest is love, are really good words for us to remember as we try to make sense of these confusing times. Amen.